God creates the earth. In the beginning, God made the world. At first, the earth was covered with a vast, dark ocean. So God commanded light to break up the gloom. Then God began to bring order to his world. He told the waters to move back, and dry land appeared, which separated the seas. The land was empty, so God filled it with all kinds of plants and trees. Pretty flowers brought color to God's new creation. Next, God turned to the skies. He ordered the sun to shine by day and the moon by night. Then he made stars that twinkled in the night like bright lights. God creates the animals. God was very pleased with the world he had created, but his work was not finished. The sky and the sea were quiet. So God made living creatures who could fly in the air and swim in the water. Soon the heavens and oceans were teeming with life. Then God turned his attention to the land, which was beautiful but empty. So God created all the animals, from the smallest mite to the biggest beast, and they roamed throughout the earth. God creates man and woman. There was something missing from God's new world. The most wonderful part was still to come. God made human beings with minds to think and hearts to love. The first man was created by God. God realized that man was lonely. So he made woman out of the ribs of man. God called both man and woman Adam. And the man called the woman his wife, Eve. And they lived together in a perfect place called the Garden of Eden. God was pleased with his creation. The forbidden fruit. Adam and Eve were very happy in the Garden of Eden. They were friends with God, their maker, and they enjoyed everything that he had created. They were in charge of God's world. But in return, God wanted them to obey him. He loved them and knew what was best for them. There were many trees laden with tasty fruit in the Garden of Eden, but there was just one tree that God did not want Adam and Eve to touch. This was the tree of knowledge of good and evil. If you eat the fruit of that tree, you will die, said God. Adam and Eve disobey God. The snake, the craftiest of all of God's animals, told Eve, as she was in the Garden of Eden, about the tree that God had told them not to touch. He lied and said, if you eat the fruit from this tree, you will be like God, because you will know what is good and what is bad. Eve was tempted, and she disobeyed God, so she took a bite of the forbidden fruit, and she gave it to Adam, who did the same. When God found out what they had done, he was concerned and sad. He didn't want Adam and Eve to eat from the tree of life also, because that would mean that they would live forever in a fallen or bad state. So he told Adam to leave. Cain and Abel. Adam and Eve had two sons named Cain and Abel. Cain was a farmer and Abel was a shepherd. One day, the brothers offered presents to God. Cain brought some ripe corn and Abel offered a lamb. God looked into the hearts of the two men, not just at their gifts. He knew Abel loved him, and he respected his offering. But he knew Cain was selfish, so he refused his gift. He did not respect Cain's gift. Cain was furious with God and jealous of his brother. When they were alone together, Cain killed Abel. To punish Cain, God sent him away from home to live a sad and lonely life. Noah built an ark. God was no longer happy with the world he had created. The people had turned away from him and were living wicked lives. God decided to send a flood to wash away everything that was bad. But there was one old man, Noah, who still loved and obeyed God. So God asked Noah to build a big wooden ark. He gave him special instructions to follow. Then God told him to gather together 2 of every kind of living creature on earth, 1 male and 1 female. All on board. Noah did everything that he was asked to do. He built the ark, gathered all the animals, and stowed away enough food for them to eat. Then, 2 by 2, the animals climbed into the ark. It was a tight fit. Finally, Noah got on board with his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. God promised to keep them all safe. The flood. The heavens opened and it began to pour with rain. Noah, his family, and all the animals were safe in the ark. It rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and floodwaters rose and covered the whole earth. But then the rain stopped. The ark came aground on a mountaintop. Noah sent out a dove, which flew back with an olive leaf in its beak. This was a sign that the earth was no longer flooded. Then God told Noah it was time to leave the ark. The rainbow. The doors of the ark were opened. The animals left to begin a new life and fill the earth again. Noah and his family were very happy to be back on dry land also. They gave thanks to God for keeping them safe. God promised that he would never again send such a terrible flood. As a sign and reminder of this promise, he placed a beautiful rainbow in the sky. God talks to Abraham. Abraham lived in a comfortable house in the city of Ur. One day, God said something very surprising to Abraham. He said, "Leave this city and go to a land that I will show you. If you do this, I will bless you and make you great." Abraham was 75 years old, and it would not be easy for him to begin a traveler's life at this age. But he obeyed God and packed up all his belongings. He left home with his wife Sarah and his nephew Lot. They set off together, not sure of where they were going or how long their journey would take them. Abraham and Lot. Abraham and Lot owned many sheep and goats. They had to keep moving from place to place to find fresh grass for them. Sometimes arguments broke out between Abraham's servants and Lot's servants over the best fields for the flocks. Abraham wanted these fights to stop. He said, "Let's go off in different directions," he suggested to Lot. "Then there will be plenty for all our animals to eat." When Lot chose the best grassy valleys, Abraham did not mind. God noticed Abraham's kindness. "Look around you," God said to Abraham. "I will give you all this land and your family."
Abraham is promised a son. Abraham and Sarah longed for a child of their own, but this wasn't possible. They were both very old. Sarah was 90, and Abraham was now 99 years old. But God knew all about the couple's greatest wish. One day, he appeared before Abraham and made him a special promise. "Sarah will have a baby son," said God. "You shall call him Isaac. I will bless you, so that you will have many descendants. I will give you and your family this beautiful country to live in forever. In return for this, you must promise to obey me." 3 special visitors. Abraham was sitting in his tent when he saw 3 men walking towards him. It was a very hot day, so Abraham invited the men to rest in the tent. "Stay for something to eat too," he said. Sarah was preparing their meal when one of them said to Abraham, "Soon your wife will have a baby son." Sarah overheard this and burst out laughing. "I'm too old to have a child," she thought. The man heard her laugh. "Nothing is impossible for God," he said. Suddenly, Abraham and Sarah realized that their guests were not ordinary men. They were messengers sent by God. Isaac is born. God was good to Abraham and Sarah. The following year, Sarah gave birth to a baby boy, just as God has promised. Abraham named him Isaac, which means he laughs. This was a good name because Isaac was a happy child, and he made his parents laugh with happiness. His name also reminded Sarah of the time she had laughed because she did not believe God's promise of a son. Sarah thanked God for giving her Isaac. "Who would have thought that I would have a baby at my age?" she said. "God has brought great happiness and laughter into our home." Abraham and Sarah adored Isaac. Abraham's faith. One day, God wanted to test Abraham's faith. "Take Isaac to the top of that mountain," said God. "Then build an altar and sacrifice your only son to me." Abraham was very sad, but he trusted that God would keep his promises about the future. So he climbed up the mountain and built an altar. Then he tied up Isaac and placed him on top of the altar. But as Abraham raised his dagger to kill Isaac, God told him to stop. "You have shown that you really do trust in me," said God. So Abraham untied his son. Then he saw a ram entangled in a bush, and he placed the animal on the altar instead of Isaac. A wife for Isaac. The time came for Abraham to choose a wife for Isaac. He sent his servant back to the country he had left many years ago. "Find a good match for my son," said Abraham. After a long journey, the servant arrived at Abraham's hometown. He stopped by a well and prayed to God, "Let a woman offer me a drink. This will show me she is the right choice for Isaac." A woman came up to him and gave him water from the well. God had answered the servant's prayer. The woman was from Abraham's family, and her name was Rebekah. She agreed to leave her home and marry Isaac. Esau and Jacob are born. Isaac remembered God's promise to his father that his descendants would become a great nation. So he prayed for Rebekah to have a child. Before long, Rebekah gave birth to twin boys. They were named Esau and Jacob. The brothers were not at all alike. Esau loved being outdoors and hunting deer. He was his father's favorite. Jacob preferred to stay indoors, and his mother loved him best. Esau was the elder son, but God did not want him to become head of the family. One day, Esau sold the rights of a firstborn son to Jacob just for a bowl of soup. That showed how little Esau cared for God's promise. Isaac blesses Jacob. Isaac was old and almost blind. He wanted to give a blessing to his elder son Esau. "Go out hunting and kill a deer," he said to Esau. "Then make my favorite stew, and I will bless you with everything I own." Isaac's wife heard what he had said. She went to find Jacob and said to him, "I will cook a stew so you can give it to your father instead of Esau." Jacob covered himself with goat skin and took the food to Isaac. The old man touched Jacob's hairy arms and said, "You sound like Jacob, but you feel like Esau." So Isaac was deceived into thinking he was blessing Esau. Esau is angry. Soon Esau returned home from the hunt. "I'm back," he called as he entered Isaac's tent with a bowl of stew. Isaac and Esau soon realized that they had been tricked by Jacob. Esau was furious. "I will kill my cheating brother," he shouted. When Rebekah heard this, she knew she had to act quickly to save her favorite son. "Let's send Jacob to stay with my brother Laban," Rebekah said to Isaac. So Jacob packed up all his things and said goodbye. He was sad to leave his home, but he had to run away to escape from his brother's anger. Jacob's dream. Jacob felt lonely as he set off on his journey. When night fell, he lay down on the ground to sleep, using a stone for a pillow. Jacob dreamed of a wide stairway reaching up into heaven, with angels going up and down. God was standing at the top of the stairway. "I am the God of Abraham and Isaac," God said to Jacob. "I am also your God, and I will keep my promise to make your family into a great nation. Wherever you go, I will take care of you." Jacob woke up full of wonder. "If you bring me home, God," prayed Jacob, "I will always obey you."
Jacob meets Rachel. After his dream, Jacob felt stronger and happier. He continued on his way searching for his mother's hometown. Soon he came across some shepherds standing by a well. Jacob asked the man if they knew his uncle Laban. "Yes, we do," they replied. "Look, here comes Laban's daughter Rachel." Jacob turned around and saw a beautiful woman walking towards him. She was leading a flock of sheep to the well to draw some water for them. Jacob ran to Rachel and told her who he was. Together, they went back to Laban's house. Laban welcomed Jacob into his home. Laban tricks Jacob. Jacob began working for his uncle. "How do you want me to pay you?" asked Laban. "If I work for 7 years, I would like to marry your daughter Rachel," replied Jacob. For Jacob, the 7 years flew by because he loved Rachel so much. On the evening of the marriage feast, Laban brought his daughter to Jacob. But the next morning, Jacob realized Laban had tricked him. Laban had given his elder daughter Leah instead of Rachel. Jacob was angry. But Laban explained that Leah would be sad if her younger sister got married before her. Jacob agreed to marry both sisters and to work 7 more years for his uncle. Laban and Jacob argue. Jacob and Laban did not always get along, but Jacob worked hard for his uncle. After 20 years away from home, Jacob decided it was time to return to his father Isaac. But Laban did not want him to go, so he offered to pay Jacob. Again, Laban tried to cheat Jacob and went back on his promise. God told Jacob to leave. So Jacob set off for home with all his family. Laban came after them. "Let me say goodbye to my daughters and grandchildren," he said. Jacob and Laban made up their quarrel and parted as friends. A strange wrestling match. On the journey back home, Jacob could not stop thinking about his brother. Would his brother still want to kill him? Many years ago, Jacob had played a mean trick on Esau, denying him his birthright. Jacob sent his family and flocks ahead of him so that he could think alone. As night fell, he prayed to God that his family might be spared and no harm would come to his family. But then out of nowhere, a strange man appeared. He came to wrestle with Jacob. "People will call you Israel," said the man as they fought together. "This means you never give up and always believe in God's promises." After a long fight, the man left Jacob. He did not tell Jacob his name, but Jacob knew he had met God that night. Through his fight, Jacob's trust in God had been strengthened. Jacob and Esau are reunited. The next morning, Jacob caught up with the rest of his family. Then in the distance, he saw Esau coming toward them with a big crowd of men. Jacob was not only afraid for himself, but also for his wives and their many children. Plucking up all his courage, he went on ahead of his family to meet his brother. What an enormous relief it was when Esau ran up to him and hugged him. Esau had forgiven Jacob for cheating him all these years ago. The twin brothers were so happy to see each other again that they cried for joy. Joseph's dreams. Jacob had 12 sons, but Joseph was his favorite. Jacob gave him a special coat to show just how much he loved him. This made the older brothers jealous. One day, Joseph began telling his brothers about the strange dreams he had been having. "We were in the fields, tying up bundles of corn. My bundles stood straight up, and yours bowed down to mine," said Joseph. "In another dream," said Joseph, "the sun, the moon, and 11 stars all bowed down to me." Upon hearing this, the brothers began to hate Joseph more than ever. "Do you really think you can rule over us?" they muttered angrily. The jealous brothers. One day, Joseph was sitting at home with Jacob. His brothers were out in the field looking after his father's sheep. Jacob was worried because his sons had been away for a long time. "Go and check and make sure they're all safe," he said to Joseph. The brothers saw Joseph from a distance because he was easy to spot in his new colorful coat. They were so jealous of him that they all but one of the brothers wanted to kill him. Jacob's eldest son Reuben persuaded his brothers to throw Joseph into a deep pit instead. Joseph is sold as a slave. Some traders passed by on their way to Egypt to sell their goods. This gave Judah, one of the brothers, an idea. "Let's sell Joseph as a slave so we can get rid of him and earn some money at the same time," he suggested. So they hauled Joseph out of the pit, took his coat, and sold him to the traders. Then they dipped the coat in goat's blood and took it home to Jacob. "A wild animal must have killed my dearest son," cried the old man. Jacob was heartbroken. Joseph ends up in prison. Joseph was not dead, but alive and well in Egypt. He was bought as a slave by Potiphar, an officer at the royal palace. Joseph always worked hard, and so Potiphar rewarded him by putting him in charge of his household. Everyone liked Joseph, especially Potiphar's wife. One day, she tried to kiss Joseph, but he pushed her away. This made her angry, so she lied to her husband, saying it was Joseph who had tried to kiss her. Potiphar was so upset that he had Joseph tied in chains and thrown into prison. The baker and the wine waiter. In prison, Joseph was joined by the king's baker and chief wine waiter. One morning, the new arrivals looked sad. "Last night, I dreamt of a vine with 3 branches. I squeezed the grapes into the king's cup," said the waiter, "and I dreamed I was carrying 3 pastry baskets to the king. But birds came and pecked at them," said the baker. "In 3 days' time, the king will give you back your job," Joseph explained to the waiter. He asked the waiter to mention his name to the king when he was set free. Then he turned to the baker. "But the king will put you to death in 3 days." It all happened just as Joseph said.